Why did she sit down in the middle of the run, while everyone else pushed forward, lungs burning, legs screaming? Why did she look calm when the rest looked broken? And why, when shouted at, did she only answer with words that made no sense? At Fort Campbell in the crushing Kentucky heat, soldiers were supposed to sweat, to bleed, to prove themselves. But Corporal Lahi Becker was doing none of that. Her squad sprinted in formation, 50 pounds of gear cutting into shoulders, boots pounding into dirt, faces twisted with determination. She had kept pace for half a minute and then simply stepped aside, walked to a patch of shade beneath a pine tree, sat down cross-legged, closed her eyes. Not exhaustion, not collapse, just stillness, as if she were meditating in a quiet park, not inside one of the hardest selection programs the U.S. Army could offer. By the time her squad returned, red-faced, dripping sweat, she hadn't moved. She opened her eyes, dusted her uniform, and asked calmly, "Ready for the next event, sir?" It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't laziness, it was something else. And the others hated her for it. Lieutenant Carter's face flushed deeper than his exertion. "Becker, what the hell was that? You quit on us." But she didn't argue, didn't apologize, didn't even try to explain. She only repeated that same maddening tone, calm, professional, untouchable, ready for the next task. Her squad was boiling with resentment, but the truth was already spreading beyond their small circle. Other candidates whispered during chow. Instructors wrote her name down with question marks, and Master Sergeant Hamilton, who had spent 2 decades reading soldiers like books, began to suspect there was more to this woman than the surface revealed. Still, none of them knew her, not really. If you'd seen her walking down any American street, you wouldn't look twice. Average height, blonde hair pulled back into a regulation bun, a uniform that fit properly but without any flourish. The kind of woman who'd disappear into a crowd before you even realized you noticed her. But there was something about her eyes, calm, deliberate, as if every doorway she walked through was being assessed, exit routes cataloged, sightlines mapped, cover identified. She never sat with her back to a room, never left her gear out of reach, never let her hands idle except when she wanted people to believe she was. Her teammates didn't know what to do with her. She seemed built to fail. She didn't run when they ran, didn't shoot when they fired, didn't crawl through the mud when the whistle blew. And yet she never looked weak. Even when caked with mud, sitting still beneath barbed wire while others scraped their elbows bloody, there was no fear in her face, no panic, no shaking arms, just stillness, like a predator conserving energy. The anger grew. Sergeant Williams, steady and scarred from deployments, finally muttered what others had started to fear. "She's going to get someone killed." Specialist Davis, younger and twitching with nerves, couldn't stand her silence. "Maybe she thinks she's too good for all of us. Maybe she knows she's going to wash out anyway." And Lieutenant Carter, for him it was humiliation. His leadership meant nothing to her. His speeches didn't move her. His orders didn't stir her. She answered politely, always professionally, but then went right back to doing what only she seemed authorized to do: nothing. The squad cracked under the pressure. Trust bled out with every exercise. But Lahi never cracked. When they fired at targets, she stood still, her weapon unfired. When they cleared buildings, she drifted to the rear, sat cross-legged, and claimed she was maintaining rear security. When Carter shouted for suppressing fire, when Williams demanded she move, her answer never changed. Calm, certain, infuriating. Proper authorization for forward engagement has not been received. No one understood what it meant. Not Hamilton, not Carter, not Williams, certainly not Davis. But someone else did. Because one evening, after another day of whispers and resentment, Hamilton made a phone call. First to Becker's previous commanding officer, then to a number not listed in any directory. He didn't ask why. He already knew this was above his pay grade. By dawn, a black sedan was already on the road from Langley. But the squad didn't know that. All they knew was the strange woman in their ranks, dragging them down, eroding trust, breaking cohesion. At Chow, conversations died when she sat nearby. In the barracks, her presence split the air like static. In training, she was a void, unreliable, unpredictable, unbearable. And yet, there was something unsettling. She wasn't scared. Not ever. While others trembled under pressure, she was composed. While others twitched in their bunks, unable to sleep more than a handful of minutes, she lay still as stone, breathing steady, like someone who had mastered the art of sleep as a weapon. Even the way she ate carried patterns. Fast enough not to linger, slow enough not to seem rushed. Every bite tasted first. Every position chosen with her back against the wall. These weren't habits of a broken soldier. They were survival reflexes. Williams noticed first. He didn't say it aloud, but he'd seen men like her before. The ones who came back from certain deployments different. The ones who didn't say where they'd been. The ones who acted like silence itself was armor. But Carter didn't notice, or maybe he couldn't. His pride wouldn't let him. To him, Becker was a failure, a liability to cut loose. Still, the mystery grew. And the more she did nothing, the more it felt like something. Hamilton, watching from his platform, recognized the stillness for what it was. Not defeat, not fatigue, something else, something waiting, something hidden. But the squad couldn't see that. For them, the final straw came in the kill house. The whistle blew. The squad flowed in, rifles raised, moving with practiced precision through plywood rooms meant to simulate an urban battlefield. Carter led. Williams secured. Davis checked corners, trembling but determined. And Becker. She followed them in, rifle raised, steps controlled, eyes sharp. For one breath she looked like she belonged. Then she stopped, sat cross-legged in the first cleared room, closed her eyes, rifle resting across her knees. "Rear security," she whispered when Carter found her. It was infuriating, embarrassing, dangerous. The squad pressed on without her, improvising through rooms, firefights, civilians, and hostiles tangled in chaos. They completed the mission. Barely. But when they returned for her, she hadn't moved. She stood, shouldered her rifle, and joined formation as if she'd been there the whole time. In the debrief, Carter broke. "Sergeant, she abandoned us. She just sat down in the middle of the op." Hamilton's eyes were steady, but his voice carried steel. "Corporal Becker, explain your actions." Rear security was maintained. No hostile forces compromised our entry point. You were supposed to clear rooms, provide fire support. Proper authorization for forward engagement was not received, Sergeant. Her words hung in the air like a riddle no one could solve. But there was one man who could. And at that very moment, the black sedan was already passing through Fort Campbell's gates. Why did she look so calm when everyone else shook from exhaustion? Why did she sleep as if her body knew secrets about rest the others couldn't touch? And why, when the instructors screamed at her, did she never break, never bend, never even flinch? By the second week at Fort Campbell, whispers had turned to open resentment. The Ranger assessment program had already chewed through half the candidates. Some quit, crushed by the Kentucky heat, the endless runs, the screaming sergeants. Others were carried away by medics, joints torn, bones broken, spirits shattered. The survivors, 37 now, moved like ghosts themselves. Precision in every movement, silent in the chow hall, obsessive in the way they strapped gear, checked weapons, folded uniforms. Every ounce of energy mattered. Every mistake drew blood. And then there was her. Corporal Becker, cross-legged on her bunk, breathing steady, gear laid out perfectly, eyes closed as though she had all the time in the world. The others hated it. They sweated, she rested. They trembled, she stayed still. They broke themselves against the obstacle course while she crawled 10 meters through mud and barbed wire, then stopped cold, chin resting on her arms, eyes closed like she was taking a nap. And yet, when it was over, she wasn't even dirty. Carter couldn't stand it. The lieutenant had grown up on accolades and achievement, leading from the front, never failing. And this woman, this quiet enigma, was making a mockery of everything he believed in. "She's making us all look weak," he told anyone who'd listen, packing the barracks like a caged wolf. "The instructors will think we can't control our own squad. She's dragging us down." Williams had a different angle. His voice was quieter, deeper, laced with combat memory. "She's going to get somebody killed. In real combat, you can't just shut down when things get hard. You don't get to choose when to check out. I've buried men because of that." And Davis, his fear found fuel in her silence. "Maybe she knows she's going to wash out anyway," he muttered. "Maybe that's why she doesn't care." The other four squadmates drifted toward one of those three voices: Carter's pride, Williams's caution, or Davis's insecurity. Either way, the result was the same. Becker was alone. Meals were silent when she sat down. Gear checks were shared among the rest of them, but not her. Conversations dropped to whispers when she walked near. And still she didn't crack. She ate in silence, eyes never leaving her tray. She cleaned her rifle with a ritual precision that seemed less like maintenance and more like meditation. She slept flat on her bunk, motionless, her breathing steady, while the others tossed and muttered in restless dreams. She was ice in a furnace. The instructors noticed. Hamilton most of all. He watched from his platform, clipboard in hand, but his eyes told a different story. He'd seen broken soldiers. This wasn't broken. He'd seen frauds, too. This wasn't fraud. It was something else. Something dangerous. The first crack came during the combat simulation. Fort Campbell's Killhouse complex was built like a nightmare. Plywood alleys, three-story buildings, stairwells where shadows turned into split-second decisions. Inside were role players, some hostiles, some civilians, armed with paint rounds that stung like hornets and punished mistakes. Carter's squad stood outside the first building at 5:30, weapons loaded, nerves on edge. Carter briefed them with all the confidence he could muster. Stack formation, room by room, positive identification before you shoot, stick to the plan. They nodded, some with faith, some with doubt. Becker took her place at the rear of the stack, rifle raised, face unreadable. The whistle blew. Carter flowed in first, Williams right behind him, moving with the fluid precision of a man who'd done this for real. Davis jittered into position, heart pounding so loud he could hear it over the shouting. They cleared the first room, 2 role players, 1 hostile, 1 civilian. Perfect execution. Except Becker didn't follow. By the time Carter turned, shouting, she was already sitting against the far wall of the room they just cleared, cross-legged, rifle across her knees, eyes closed. "Rear security," she said when confronted. It was infuriating. The squad left her. They had to. Missions couldn't wait. They cleared the building floor by floor, scrambling through chaos. They survived, but barely. When it was over, they found her in the same spot, calm, rested, as if the firefight had never happened. In the debrief, Carter's frustration boiled over. "Sergeant," she abandoned her post. She sat down and refused to fight. Hamilton's gaze moved from him to Becker. "Corporal, explain." Her answer was the same as always, calm, certain, impossible. Rear security was maintained. No hostile forces compromised our entry point. You were supposed to engage, clear rooms, provide fire support. Her eyes didn't blink. Proper authorization for forward engagement was not received. The words sent a chill through Hamilton. It wasn't just the certainty, it was the language. Not army talk, not training jargon, something else. Authorization, engagement parameters. Words that sounded like orders from a place no one here had clearance to see. That night Hamilton made another phone call. He didn't ask questions. He already knew he wouldn't get answers. He only knew that whatever Becker was, she wasn't what her files said. By morning, the black sedan had passed through the gates. But the squad didn't know that. All they knew was that their cohesion was shattered. Every mission now felt like 7 soldiers carrying the weight of an eighth who refused to pull her share. Their performance suffered. Anger festered. Trust evaporated. Even other squads noticed. They whispered about Carter's team, about the blonde corporal who didn't fire her weapon, who didn't crawl through mud, who didn't climb ropes, who didn't do anything except sit in corners and close her eyes. The resentment turned into something else, fear. Not fear of her. No one was afraid of Becker. They treated her like a problem, not a threat. But there was a growing fear about what she meant for them, what she'd cost them, how her presence might sink their shot at becoming Rangers. And then came the helicopter insertion. The Blackhawks' rotors sliced the pre-dawn air, carrying Carter's squad to a landing zone 2 kilometers from their target. They roped down in precision, boots striking dirt, weapons raised. Carter split them into positions. Becker, Overwatch, ridge line, cover us. For once it seemed like the perfect assignment. Designated marksman, patience, independence. She could finally prove her worth. She moved into the trees with flawless stealth. Her body knew how to do it, quiet steps, careful camouflage, the kind of discipline only veterans carried. But halfway to the ridge line she stopped, sat down against a tree, closed her eyes. Carter's voice crackled through the radio minutes later. Overwatch, do you have eyes on the target? Silence. Overwatch, respond. More silence. William spat, she's done it again. And so they carried the mission without her. 7 soldiers improvising where 8 should have been. They gathered intelligence, made it to extraction, barely. And when they arrived, she was already waiting at the landing zone. Calm, clean, equipment in order. Mission completed, sir. Carter exploded. You didn't do anything. Extraction point security was maintained. No hostile forces compromised the landing zone. William stepped in, his patience at the breaking point. Becker, in a real operation, that kind of abandonment gets people killed. Her answer never changed. Authorization parameters were maintained throughout the operation. Hamilton debriefed with professional steel, but inside he felt something else, dread. He'd seen broken soldiers, he'd seen liars, he'd seen failures. This wasn't any of those things. This was deliberate, conditioned, programmed. And it was beyond his clearance. The final straw came in the last field exercise, a 72-hour gauntlet of infiltration, direct action and extraction, sleep deprivation, stress, maximum chaos. For 2 days, Becker moved like a competent soldier, spacing perfect, noise discipline flawless, gear immaculate. But when the assault came, when Carter's team needed her suppressive fire on a guard tower, she stayed silent, cross-legged behind a tree, her rifle resting, her eyes closed. They carried on without her, again. They won barely, but the cost was clear. Their unit cohesion was gone. And so was Hamilton's patience. When he stood before Becker, clipboard in hand, his voice carried the weight of a man about to end a career. Corporal Becker, your performance is inconsistent with Ranger standards. You will be scheduled for dismissal from the program. For the first time in 3 weeks, something flickered in her face. Not fear, not shame, not regret. Something else, a shift, a calculation. And then she said only one word. Understood. But what Hamilton didn't know, what no one in the squad knew, was that his recommendation had already triggered a chain of calls. That the black sedan rolling through Fort Campbell's gates carried someone who knew exactly who Corporal Lahai Becker really was, and why she had never needed their approval. Why did the black sedan roll through the Fort Campbell gate without a single question asked? Why did the guards straighten, salute, and let it pass as if the vehicle itself carried authority? And who was the man inside? Eyes weathered, uniform stripped of identifiers, moving with the kind of precision that only came from places that didn't officially exist. The answer, like everything about Corporal Becker, wasn't in the file. At 800, while the surviving candidates assembled for what they thought was their final exercise, the sedan pulled into the compound. Its tinted windows reflected the Kentucky sun, and when the passenger door opened, silence fell like a curtain. Commander Jake Morrison stepped out. He wasn't Army. His insignia marked him Navy, but not in any way the soldiers recognized. No patches, no ribbons, no colors of any known command, just a plain uniform, crisp and functional, worn by a man who had long ago stopped needing symbols to prove his worth. His face told its own story. Weathered lines, eyes hard but not cruel, a posture built from years of tension and control. He moved like every step mattered, like wasted motion was something he'd had punished out of him in places the rest of the world didn't believe in. Master Sergeant Hamilton was waiting at the gate. His orders had been clear: cooperate, don't question. But Hamilton was a man who lived on questions, and every bone in his body screamed to ask one now. Still, he saluted. "Sergeant Hamilton, sir." Morrison's handshake was firm, not performative. "Commander Morrison, I understand you have Corporal Becker scheduled for dismissal." "Yes, sir. Her performance has been inconsistent with Ranger standards." Morrison's eyes didn't flicker. "I'd like to observe her final exercise before any action is taken." Hamilton hesitated. "Respectfully, sir, she's failed to participate in multiple scenarios. She abandons her squad, refuses to engage, compromises team cohesion. She's a liability." "I understand your assessment," Morrison replied, voice even. "I still need to see her perform one more scenario." Hamilton studied him, the silence stretching. He had been in uniform for 20 years, long enough to recognize when something was above his clearance. And this felt like standing on the edge of a map that ended. "What kind of scenario, sir?" Morrison's answer was measured, the kind where she gets proper authorization. Hamilton didn't understand, not yet, but soon everyone would. 30 minutes later, the remaining candidates assembled at the kill house. They were ragged, hollow-eyed, but sharper for it. 3 weeks of hell had boiled them down to a hardened core. Everyone except Becker, who stood calm and unbroken, the same as she had since day one. Carter looked at her with open contempt now, Williams with wary suspicion, Davis with twitching fear. The exercise briefing was simple: a hostage rescue, multi-story building, unknown number of hostiles, civilians mixed in, time critical. Standard Ranger doctrine, but nothing about the moment felt standard. Carter gave his final orders. Standard entry, room by room, positive ID before engagement, Becker perimeter security, Overwatch. She nodded with her usual professionalism, posture the same as always. But Morrison, watching from the observation platform, noticed what Hamilton missed. A shift barely perceptible, but real. Her spine straightened, her chin tilted, her eyes focused with a kind of attention that hadn't been there before. The whistle blew. The squad flowed into the building, weapons raised. Communication clipped professional. Shots cracked inside plywood walls. Role players screamed, stumbled, fired back. Outside, Becker moved to her assigned post, rifle ready, calm as ever. And then Morrison cupped his hands and shouted 3 words. "Becker Whiskey 7-3. The effect was immediate. She rose from her position in one fluid motion, like a switch had been flipped inside her. No hesitation, no calm detachment. Her body moved with the violent grace of someone whose muscles had just remembered what they were built for. Her rifle snapped to her shoulder, sight picture acquired before thought could interfere. Inside, Carter's team hadn't yet reached the second floor when the first sharp cracks echoed from outside. 2 precise shots, a controlled pair, through a window. A role player who had been raising his weapon at the simulated hostage dropped before the squad even knew he was there. Hamilton gripped his binoculars tighter. This wasn't participation. This wasn't finally trying. This was something else entirely. She flowed around the perimeter with movements that defied everything Hamilton had seen for 3 weeks. No wasted steps. Angles anticipated before threats even appeared. When a hostile role player tried to flank the entry team through a ground floor doorway, Becker was already waiting. 2 more rounds, surgical, ending the threat before it began. It wasn't just accuracy. It was foresight. She was predicting combat geometry the way a chess master sees the board. Inside, Williams keyed his radio. "Overwatch, this is Assault 2. Outstanding work, keep it up." Her reply came back with crisp professionalism. No hesitation, no excuses. "Copy, Assault 2. One hostile northeast stairwell, 2nd floor, moving to engage." Seconds later, the target went down. The squad surged forward, almost disbelieving the sudden ease of their advance. Every threat that should have slowed them, every enemy position that should have bled time, was neutralized from the outside before it could develop. The entire mission, designed to push them to the brink, collapsed into a 12-minute sprint. When the hostage was secured, the scenario was over. 0 casualties, 0 mistakes. Record time. Hamilton lowered his binoculars, mouth dry. For 3 weeks he had been preparing to dismiss her, convinced she was either broken or a fraud. But what he just witnessed, this wasn't just competence. It was perfection. He turned to Morrison. "Commander, what the hell did I just see?" Morrison's eyes stayed on Becker, who had returned to her Overwatch posture as if nothing had changed. Calm again, professional, but different now. "You just saw Corporal Becker operate under proper authorization." "Authorization," Hamilton repeated. "What does that even mean? She's been useless for 3 weeks. She sat in corners, refused to move, compromised every mission. And now she's demonstrating intermediate capability," Morrison interrupted. Hamilton blinked. "Intermediate." Morrison finally looked at him. His voice was steady, clinical, as if reciting a fact rather than offering an explanation. "Corporal Becker is a graduate of Program Nightfall, a classified training initiative designed to create operatives capable of exceeding conventional standards. Her conditioning prevents unauthorized demonstration of those skills. Without activation, she functions at her cover level. With activation," he gestured toward the kill house. "You saw the result." Hamilton's throat tightened. "You mean all this time, all those failures?" "Weren't failures," Morrison said. "They were constraints. She wasn't permitted to engage." Hamilton tried to process it, but his framework collapsed. She was sitting in corners, crawling 10 meters and stopping, failing every test. "Not failing," Morrison corrected. "Waiting, preserving, maintaining posture until authorized to operate." Hamilton looked back at Becker through the glass. Calm again, still again, rifle across her knees. But now he saw it differently. Not weakness, not laziness, not madness. Containment. Like a high-performance engine idling at a red light. Silent, controlled, but ready. "Whiskey 7-3, Hamilton whispered. "That was the trigger." "One of them," Morrison said. Hamilton's clipboard slipped from his hand, forgotten. He had spent his career judging men and women by what they showed under pressure. But here was someone who had hidden everything until 3 words unlocked her. And suddenly, the last 3 weeks made sense. Every whisper, every refusal, every maddening explanation. Proper authorization for forward engagement has not been received. She hadn't been lying, she'd been telling them the truth. And no one had believed her. When the squad regrouped after the exercise, their faces told the story. Carter, once humiliated, now silent with shock. Williams, eyes narrowed, reassessing everything. Davis, trembling, caught between awe and fear. And Becker, calm as ever, professional, composed, but no longer ignored. Hamilton knew this wasn't over. This was only the beginning. Because if this flawless operation, this surgical violence, was only intermediate capability, then what, God help them, did full capability look like? Why did she wait until now? Why had she let them hate her, mistrust her, dismiss her, when all along she was capable of something far beyond anything they'd ever seen? The squad sat in the debriefing room, still sweating from the final exercise, paint rounds stinging in their skin, but it wasn't the pain that made them restless. It was her. Corporal Becker. They had carried her for 3 weeks, hated her, resented her, believed she was weak, broken, or insane, and in less than 13 minutes she had turned their hardest mission into something effortless. The silence in the room was heavy. Chairs creaked as they shifted. Carter sat rigid, his hands gripping his knees. Williams leaned forward, jaw tight, processing. Davis fidgeted, eyes flicking to her, then away. And she sat calm at the far end of the table, posture straight, expression neutral, the same woman they had known for weeks. Except she was. Not anymore. Commander Morrison broke the silence. His voice was clipped, clinical, carrying none of the awe that weighed on the others. Corporal Becker is not what her record says she is. Carter blinked, his frustration spilling out in words before he could stop them. Then what the hell is she, sir? Morrison's eyes turned to him, steady, unreadable. She is a graduate of program Nightfall. The words meant nothing to them. No one spoke. Hamilton finally cleared his throat, his voice lower, heavier. That's classified, isn't it? Morrison gave the smallest nod. It is, but after what you've witnessed, partial disclosure is authorized. Williams leaned forward. Sir, with respect, we've been living with her for weeks. We deserve to know what's going on. Because from where I sit, this wasn't a soldier who failed her team. This was someone hiding something. And if that something is dangerous, we need answers. Morrison studied him, then glanced toward Becker. She gave the smallest nod, as if granting him permission. So Morrison continued. Program Nightfall is a classified initiative designed to create operatives who can function in denied areas, where traditional military support cannot reach. These operators are trained to the highest levels in marksmanship, close quarters combat, reconnaissance, survival, and psychological conditioning. But the difference lies not just in skill. It lies in control. Davis frowned, his voice hesitant. Control. Nightfall operatives are conditioned, Morrison explained. They operate under strict compartmentalization protocols. Their abilities, everything you saw today, cannot be accessed unless specific authorization is given. Without activation, they function at their cover level. In Becker's case, that cover was a conventional corporal with standard infantry training. With activation, his eyes flicked toward her. You saw the result. Carter shook his head, disbelief still wrestling with the memory of her flawless precision. So all this time, she wasn't failing. She was waiting. Becker spoke then, her voice even calm but different now. Not evasive, not deflecting. Authorization for forward engagement was not received. Until today. The room stilled. Williams's eyes narrowed. And all those missions we thought you abandoned, the mud crawl, the kill house, the helicopter insertion, you weren't quitting. Correct, Becker said simply. I maintained rear security, extraction points, perimeter control within the parameters of my clearance. Davis's voice cracked. But people could have died, you just sat there. Becker turned her gaze to him, not unkindly, but with the weight of someone who had carried truths he couldn't imagine. If it had been real, authorization would have been given, and you would have seen the difference. Her words landed like stones in water. Ripples of realization spread across the table. Hamilton leaned back, his chest tight with something he hadn't felt in years, humility. He had judged her, dismissed her, written her off, and she had been telling him the truth all along. Morrison continued, filling the silence with matter-of-fact clarity. Program Nightfall operatives are assets, highly valuable. Their existence is restricted to need-to-know circles. Their conditioning is designed to protect operational security even from themselves. They cannot demonstrate capabilities unless activated by recognized authorization codes. It is a safeguard for them, for us, for everyone. Carter exhaled, running a hand down his face. So for 3 weeks, we've been evaluating her as if she were one of us. But she was. She was, Morrison corrected. She lived among you, ate with you, slept beside you, endured the same conditions. That was part of the evaluation, not a view of her, to ensure her conditioning remained intact after injury. Injury? Williams asked, frowning. Becker spoke again. Head trauma, previous deployment. Command required verification that conditioning was uncompromised. It was said flatly, without elaboration, but in those clipped words the squad heard something deeper. She had been broken once, wounded, tested in ways none of them had, and this entire charade, this 3-week torment of being hated, resented, dismissed, had been her test. To see if she still belonged in the shadows. Morrison confirmed it with a curt nod. Her protocols are intact. Her capabilities remain operational. She is cleared for return to assignment. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Davis finally whispered what the others were thinking. Assignment? You mean she's leaving? Morrison's answer was simple. Within 24 hours. Carter stared at the table. For weeks he had led her, or thought he had, barked orders, demanded compliance, shouted in her face, and she had obeyed only her conditioning. Now he saw it, the humility cut deep. Williams leaned back, eyes searching the ceiling. All this time I thought she was a liability, someone who'd get men killed, and she was the opposite. Hamilton's voice was softer now, reflective. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones you'd never suspect. No one spoke after that. When the squad left the room, their faces told a story words couldn't. Carter's jaw was tight, but there was something else behind his eyes, an understanding he'd never had before. Leadership wasn't about shouting. It was about seeing what others couldn't, and he had failed that test. Williams walked slower, shoulders heavy with reflection. He had misjudged her too, measured her by his experience, his rules. He had thought she was broken. She was. And Davis, he avoided her gaze, torn between shame and awe. He had mocked her, feared her, doubted her, and all along she had been something he couldn't comprehend. As for Becker, she walked calm, unchanged, the same as she had for 3 weeks, but now every step seemed different, not because she had changed, but because they finally understood. She had never been theirs to judge. That night Morrison filed his report. Clinical precise. Corporal Lahi Becker, Program Nightfall operative. Protocols intact. Cleared for redeployment. Hamilton read it, but the words barely registered. He kept seeing her face, still calm, unreadable, and the flicker in her eyes when he had threatened dismissal. Not fear, not anger. Recognition. Because she had known all along that his words didn't matter. And he had never realized how blind he'd been. The next morning, the black sedan rolled back out through Fort Campbell's gate. Inside, Becker sat silent, her gear packed, her orders classified, her destination unknown. She left behind whispers that would never be written into files, but would linger in the minds of every man who had trained beside her. Carter, who would never again assume weakness from silence. Williams, who would carry the lesson that the most capable weren't always the loudest. Davis, who would learn that insecurity blinds men to greatness. And Hamilton, who would never forget that leadership sometimes means looking deeper than the surface. She was gone as quietly as she had arrived. And for the rest of their careers, they would wonder how many others like her walked among them, hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right words to unlock who they really were. Why did they send her back into the shadows so quickly? Why, after 3 weeks of silence and resentment, after a single demonstration of flawless skill, was she already gone, disappearing into a system even her squad couldn't name? The black sedan didn't take her to an airfield, not at first. It took her to a nondescript building outside Nashville, one that didn't exist on any registry. The kind of place without signs, without flags, without a name. Inside, fluorescent lights hummed over gray walls. The air smelled of disinfectant and secrecy. Commander Morrison led her down a hall lined with closed doors, past security checkpoints where guards didn't ask questions, only swiped cards and stepped aside. Finally, they entered a small, windowless room, 2 chairs, 1 table, nothing else. "Sit," Morrison said. She obeyed, calm, silent. From a folder he slid across a photograph, grainy, taken from a drone, a compound in the mountains, low buildings, dirt roads, armed men. Her eyes scanned it once. Every angle, every shadow, every exit point cataloged in her mind with mechanical precision. "Target," Morrison said. "Designation, Ghost Commander. Real name unknown. Leader of an insurgent cell operating in northern Syria. Responsible for 6 ambushes on U.S. convoys in the past year. Our window is short. He moves often. You'll insert with a small team, confirm identity, and terminate." Her expression didn't change. Authorization parameters. Full activation. Code Whiskey 73 Delta 49. Her body absorbed the words like a key sliding into a lock. The tension in her spine shifted. Her breathing changed. Not faster, not louder, just calibrated. Ready. But then Morrison paused. His voice softened only slightly. "There's one complication. He has his family with him. Wife, 2 children. They're always close. Your orders are to avoid collateral casualties at all costs. Do you understand?" Her eyes lifted. For a heartbeat, something flickered there. Not protocol, not conditioning, something human. "Yes, sir," she said. Morrison studied her a moment longer. He knew what that flicker meant. Nightfall operatives weren't supposed to feel, but they always did. And that was the real test. 48 hours later, Becker was strapped into the belly of a Blackhawk, night wind rushing past as they thundered over the Syrian border. Her team was small. 4 operators, faces painted black, rifles tight against their bodies. They didn't know who she was. They thought she was just another asset attached for her supposed linguistic and reconnaissance expertise. They called her ma'am at first. After a few hours of silence, they stopped calling her anything. The team leader, Chief Petty Officer Ramirez, gave the final briefing over the roar of rotors. "We dropped 2 clicks south. Ingress on foot. Becker, you're on eyes. Confirm target before we breach. Rules of engagement are strict, only fire on hostiles. Civilians stay out of it. Clear." She nodded once. They didn't see how her pulse slowed, how her vision sharpened, how her entire body slipped into that conditioned state of hyper-readiness. They didn't see how the code words had changed her. The night air in Syria was cold, cutting against sweat as boots pounded dirt. The team moved in silence, weapons raised, scanning the horizon. Becker led them without seeming to. Every path she chose offered concealment. Every pause coincided with enemy patrols passing just out of sight. She didn't speak, didn't order, but her movements guided them as surely as if she'd written the terrain herself. Ramirez noticed. His eyes lingered on her longer than the others. Something about the way she moved unsettled him, like she'd been here before, like she'd been everywhere before. When they reached Overwatch, Becker slipped prone, rifle extended, eye pressed to the scope. Through glass, the compound unfolded. Men smoking by trucks, others walking patrols with AKs slung lazily. One building brighter than the rest, curtains drawn but leaking light. Her eye steadied on a figure moving inside. Tall, broad shoulders, scar across the jaw. "Target confirmed," she whispered into comms. Ramirez stiffened. She hadn't asked for consensus, hadn't requested secondary confirmation, just stated it with certainty. But when his own scope aligned, he saw she was right. It was him, Ghost Commander. The breach was swift, explosives on the outer gate. 2 men dropped before alarms could ring. The team flowed in, surgical room by room, clearing with precision. Becker moved differently. She anticipated angles before the doors swung open. Her weapon fired not in bursts but in singular, perfect shots, every round a decision already made. By the time they reached the central building, the compound was chaos. Smoke, screams, the crack of automatic fire. And then they found him. The target was cornered in his own home, dragging his wife and children with him. A pistol in one hand, a child in the other. Desperation in his eyes, rage spilling from his mouth in a language the others didn't understand. The team froze, no clear shot, civilians in the way. But Becker moved forward, slow, measured, rifle raised, voice calm. "Put the weapon down." Her accent was flawless in his tongue, Arabic smooth and commanding. The man's eyes widened, his grip faltered. For a split second he hesitated. Ramirez hissed into comms, "Becker, what the hell are you doing? Take the shot." But she didn't, not yet. Because for the first time since activation, her conditioning met something it couldn't process. The children's eyes, wide, terrified. For 3 weeks at Fort Campbell she had been a ghost, untouchable, unreadable. But here, in this room filled with smoke and fear, something cracked through. A memory, a flash, another room years ago, another mission, another family. A boy crying as her rifle sighted his father. Her breath hitched. For a heartbeat she was programmed Nightfall. She was Lahai Becker, daughter soldier, human. And then the man screamed, raising his pistol. Her rifle fired once. The Ghost Commander fell. Silence. The wife sobbed, clutching her children. The team surged forward, securing the room, confirming the kill. Ramirez grabbed her shoulder. That hesitation could have cost us the mission. Her eyes met his, calm again, controlled, but deep inside something flickered still. "I executed within authorization parameters," she said. But in her chest the truth burned hotter. She had almost broken them. Extraction was clean, the body confirmed, intelligence recovered, the mission declared success. But on the flight back, Becker sat apart, helmet off, rifle across her knees, eyes closed, not in rest, not in meditation, in something closer to war with herself. Because the conditioning had no space for what she had felt in that room. Fear, recognition, guilt. The faces of those children burned in her mind, as sharp as any image in her scope. And for the first time in years, she wondered if the silence inside her was really strength, or if it was a shield to hide from the truth. Back at the forward base, Ramirez filed his report, precise, efficient, but when asked about Becker, his words slowed. She was flawless, perfect shot placement, anticipated threats, saved lives. A pause. But there was hesitation, just for a second. "I don't know what that means." His superior nodded, nodding it without comment. But in a sealed room elsewhere, Morrison read the same words. His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. Because he knew exactly what it meant. Lahai Becker was still human. And in program Nightfall, that was the most dangerous variable of all. Why did the hesitation haunt her more than the shot itself? Why, when the mission was declared a success, did her mind keep circling back to the look in those children's eyes, burning brighter than the face of the man she had killed? 2 days after Syria, Becker sat alone in a barracks room that wasn't hers. Forward operating bases were temporary, transitory, interchangeable. The cot beneath her creaked the same as 100 others she had slept on. The walls were painted the same dull tan. The air smelled of sweat, dust, and gun oil. But inside her, nothing felt standard anymore. Her hands were steady as she cleaned her rifle, but her thoughts weren't. The conditioning worked on her body, on her reflexes, on her movements. It kept her posture straight, her breath even, her eyes sharp. But it couldn't touch her memories. And the memory of that boy's eyes, wide, trembling, reflecting the barrel of her rifle, wouldn't leave. For 3 weeks at Fort Campbell, she had been a ghost. She could endure silence, contempt, judgment. That had been easy. But this was different. For the first time since Morrison's activation words had unlocked her, she wondered, was she still in control? Or was she nothing more than the program they had built, an extension of orders and code phrases? The team didn't see that war in her eyes. To them, she was something stranger. They had seen her work now. They had seen her flawless precision, her uncanny foresight, and while some of them whispered awe, others whispered something else. Fear. At chow she ate alone, not because she chose to, but because the table around her emptied every time she sat down. Conversations cut short. Forks clattered against trays. Davis was the first to speak it aloud. She's not like us. She doesn't even blink when she kills. Ramirez didn't answer at first. He had seen her hesitate, though he hadn't written it in the report exactly as it was. He carried that moment like a secret, one he didn't know how to name. Finally, he said only, "She's different." Williams grunted. Different doesn't cover it. She moves like she's already seen the fight before it happens. That's not training, that's something else. They didn't know how right they were. Morrison knew. He read every report. He spoke with Ramirez. He listened to the hesitation that wasn't supposed to exist. And then, behind a locked door in a base office, he called a number that routed through 3 secure lines before anyone answered. "Nightfall Asset Becker, call sign Ghost Commander," he said. The voice on the other end was flat. "Operational performance. Successful mission. Target eliminated, 0 casualties." "Then what is your concern, Commander?" Morrison hesitated. The pause was dangerous in itself. There was hesitation, brief but real, when collateral was present. Silence on the line. Finally, protocol integrity compromised. "Unclear." Another silence. Then the voice spoke again, colder. "Continue evaluation. If compromise confirmed, terminate." Morrison closed his eyes for half a second before answering. "Understood." Becker didn't know the order had been spoken, but she felt it in the way Morrison watched her now. His gaze was sharper, his questions during debrief more pointed. "Describe the moment before engagement," he asked one evening. She answered with mechanical precision. "Target confirmed, weapon drawn, risk to team imminent, execution authorized." But his eyes lingered. "You waited, why?" She held his stare, calm, still, but her voice carried the faintest tremor when she replied. "Parameters of collateral engagement were unclear." He wrote it down without comment, but both of them knew it wasn't the whole truth. 2 weeks later, they deployed again. This time, it wasn't a compound. It was a convoy, 3 trucks carrying explosives across the desert under cover of night. The team was tasked with interdiction before the trucks reached a civilian population center. Simple, clear, clean. They set up along a ridge, sand cold under their bellies, stars sharp overhead. Becker's scope tracked the convoy miles before the others even heard the engines. "Visual acquired," she whispered. 3 trucks, 9 armed personnel. Recommend engagement at half a kilometer." Ramirez nodded. "Do it." Her finger tightened on the trigger. The first truck's driver fell before the echo of her shot reached the others. The second dropped as he reached for the wheel. The third stumbled, throat punched red by a round that none of them even saw leave her barrel. The trucks ground to a halt, tires shredding dirt. Men scrambled for cover. Her rounds found them before they touched the ground. It was clinical, ruthless, perfect. But then one of the trucks rocked and she saw movement in the back. Not weapons, not explosives. A child. Barely 6 years old, dust on his face, small hands clutching a blanket. Her breath caught. The shot she had already lined up wavered. Her finger hovered, frozen. Ramirez barked through comms. "Becker, last truck still mobile, take the shot." Her scope wavered again. She saw the child's face, illuminated by moonlight, eyes wide with the same fear she had seen in Syria. Her pulse stuttered. "Becker," Ramirez shouted, "now." Her round cracked, but it struck wide, burying itself in the sand. Another operator fired and the driver dropped. The truck swerved, skidding into the dirt. The mission was saved. But the silence that followed in Becker's headset was heavier than any bullet. Back at base, the report was clean. 3 trucks destroyed, enemy combatants neutralized, collateral unharmed, mission success. But Ramirez didn't hide his anger. "You froze," he said in the debrief. "You had the shot and you froze." Her answer was calm, professional, exactly as she had been trained. Collateral risk exceeded parameters. Hesitation ensured compliance with orders to avoid civilian casualties. But Ramirez slammed a hand on the table. "That hesitation almost cost us the mission." Morrison said nothing during the debrief. He only watched her. When the others left, he closed the door. "You saw a child," he said. Her silence was answer enough. "Program Nightfall doesn't hesitate," he continued. "Collateral avoidance is procedural. Hesitation is not." She met his eyes. For the first time, her voice wasn't even. It carried something raw. "Then maybe Program Nightfall isn't human anymore." Morrison's jaw tightened. He knew what that meant. She was slipping, cracks in the conditioning, ghosts of memory and conscience breaking through. And the order he had received over that secure line burned in his mind. "If compromise confirmed, terminate." That night Becker lay awake in the dark. The barracks around her were filled with the slow breathing of men who trusted in steel and routine. But she stared at the ceiling, eyes unblinking, her mind replaying the face of the child in the truck. She had followed orders. The mission was complete. The collateral was unharmed. But in the silence of her own thoughts, she admitted what no report would ever say. She had hesitated because she wanted to. Because for the first time in years, she felt the weight of what her hands had been trained to do. And she didn't know if she could carry it much longer. Morrison filed his report the next morning. He used the words he was supposed to: mission success, operational parameters achieved, asset Becker performance effective. But at the bottom, in a line that would only be read by eyes with the highest clearance, he wrote something else. Observed deviation. Recommend continued evaluation. It was the closest he could come to protecting her. But he knew the truth. If she hesitated again, if she cracked further, the order would come down. And this time, there would be no debrief. Only silence. Why did the mission feel different before it even began? Why did every breath, every step, carry the weight of something final, as if she already knew what choice was waiting for her out there in the dark? They told her nothing as usual. The briefing was thin. A name, a map, a time window, the kind of details given to keep her body moving but her mind blind. But Becker had learned to read between the lines, and everything about this op felt wrong. Morrison didn't look at her when he delivered the orders. That was the first sign. His voice was flat, stripped of its usual control, like a man trying not to reveal the truth behind the words. Target is high value. Meeting in a safe house outside Mosul. Multiple armed personnel, possible foreign financiers. You will insert with a 6-man team. Rules of engagement are direct action. Terminate all hostiles. Collateral is not expected. She nodded, but her eyes stayed on him, searching. And in that silence she knew something had shifted. The insertion was routine. A Blackhawk ride through hot, restless air, boots on sand, rifles raised in silence. The team moved with steady precision. Ramirez in the lead, Williams close behind, Davis twitching at every shadow. Becker, silent as ever, flowed at the rear. But her thoughts weren't steady. She felt the hesitation before it came, like a pulse waiting in the dark. Every mission replayed in her mind: the compound in Syria, the convoy in the desert, the faces of children, the split-second tremors of conscience that her conditioning couldn't erase. And tonight she wondered, would those ghosts find her again? They reached the safe house just past midnight. A squat building, 3 stories of cracked concrete and faded paint. Lights glowed faint through shuttered windows. The team stacked on the door, explosives set. Ramirez counted down, fingers 3, 2, 1. The breach thundered, wood and steel collapsing inward. The team surged inside, weapons barking, flashbangs cracking. Chaos, shouts, gunfire. Men fell before they could raise rifles. Becker flowed with them, her rifle speaking in single, perfect notes. Precision, efficiency, not a round wasted. They cleared the first floor in seconds. The second was slower. A maze of rooms, doors flung open to reveal armed men scrambling awake, shadows diving for cover. But every time a muzzle flashed, Becker's round answered first. By the time they reached the third floor, the air was thick with cordite and blood. And that's when it happened. The final room wasn't like the others. The door wasn't barricaded, it was unlocked. Ramirez pushed it open cautiously, rifle raised, and what he saw froze him mid-step. Inside were 3 men, armed, yes, but they weren't alone. Behind them, huddled against the far wall, were 5 civilians, 2 women, 3 children. The men shouted in panic, rifles wavering, dragging the civilians forward like shields. The children cried, their voices piercing through the smoke and dust. And in that instant, Becker's world split open again. Her scope aligned on one of the men, perfect sight picture, perfect shot. But the barrel hovered inches from a child's skull. Her breath caught, her finger froze. Ramirez barked into comms, voice sharp, "Take the shot." But she didn't. Not yet. Because she saw their faces, the children, the women, the terrified eyes staring straight into hers, and something deep inside her cracked wider than it ever had before. The conditioning screamed at her, "Terminate hostile, parameters authorize, execute." Her conscience whispered back, "Not this way." She didn't hear Ramirez anymore. Didn't hear the team firing, shouting, dragging bodies down. She only heard her own heartbeat, slow, heavy, breaking rhythm. And then one of the men raised his rifle, muzzle flaring toward her team. Her shot cracked, the man dropped. Another moved, another shot, another body. But the third, he shoved a child forward, pistol pressed against the boy's head. His voice was a frantic snarl in Arabic. "Back, stay back or he dies." Becker's rifle never wavered. She could end it, she knew she could. One round, one trigger pull. But the boy's wide eyes, terrified, pleading, burned into hers. And she hesitated. For one breath, 2, 3. Ramirez's shout cut through the chaos. "Becker, now." But she didn't fire. Not yet. Because something in her, something that had survived Nightfall's conditioning, refused to let her kill a child's father in front of him. So instead, she lowered her rifle. The room stilled. The man blinked, confused. His pistol still pressed against the boy's head, but his body tensed with uncertainty. And in that hesitation, Williams moved. A single shot from his carbine split the air. The man dropped. The boy stumbled free, sobbing into his mother's arms. Silence crashed over the room. The civilians clung together, shaking, alive. The team stood frozen, rifles still raised, eyes darting to Becker. And she stood calm, rifle at her side, her breathing steady again. But inside she knew. She hadn't followed the program. She had chosen. The exfiltration was clean. The safe house burned behind them. The bodies of men declared enemies lay cooling in the dark. But on the flight back, The team's eyes never left her. Ramirez furious, Williams unsettled, Davis pale with fear. No one spoke. And Becker sat apart, helmet in her lap, staring at the horizon where the first light of dawn was breaking. She had broken protocol, defied her conditioning. And she didn't regret it. Morrison was waiting when they landed. The debrief was clinical, facts recited, hostiles terminated, civilians unharmed, mission success. But then Ramirez spoke. She froze again, third floor, hostile using child as shield. She hesitated, lowered her weapon. It could have cost us everything. The room went still. Morrison's eyes shifted to Becker. Is that true? She met his gaze, calm but unflinching. I assessed risk to collateral as too high. I chose not to fire. His jaw tightened. That is not how Nightfall assets operate. Her voice was steady. Then maybe Nightfall is broken. The silence that followed was dangerous. Ramirez's jaw clenched. Williams looked away. Davis swallowed hard. And Morrison knew this wasn't hesitation anymore. This was defiance. That night, Morrison wrote his report. He stared at the words until the letters blurred because he knew what they meant. Deviation confirmed. Asset compromised. The secure line was waiting. The order was clear. Terminate. But he didn't make the call, not yet. Because something in Becker's eyes, something he hadn't seen in years, stopped him. Not weakness, not failure. Humanity. And for the first time in his long, classified career, Commander Jake Morrison asked himself a question he had buried long ago. If humanity was a flaw, or if it was the only thing worth saving. Why did he wait before picking up the phone? Why, when the order was clear, did his hand hover above the receiver as if it weighed 1,000 pounds? Commander Morrison had never hesitated before. Not in the desert, not in alleys where the wrong decision meant death, not in years of classified shadows where hesitation was fatal. But tonight, with the report on his desk and the kill order burning through secure lines, he froze. Because this wasn't about a target, it was about her. Corporal Lahi Becker. The woman who had sat cross-legged in the dirt while men spat at her. The soldier who had endured contempt, doubt, dismissal. The operative who, when activated, had moved like something engineered rather than born. And yet, when faced with a choice no program could calculate, she had chosen something the system never accounted for. She had chosen to be human. He closed the folder, stood, and left the office. Outside, the night was still. The air at the forward base smelled of fuel and sand. Floodlights hummed across rows of helicopters. Soldiers moved like ghosts between shadows. Becker sat alone on a bench near the edge of the tarmac, rifle at her side, helmet resting on her knees, staring into the dark as if she could see beyond the horizon. He approached quietly. She didn't look up until he was close enough to hear her breathe. "You disobeyed," Morrison said. Her eyes met his, calm, unflinching. "I followed the mission." "You hesitated." "I made a choice." Silence stretched between them, the kind of silence that carried more weight than shouting ever could. Finally Morrison asked, "Do you regret it?" Her eyes flickered just once. "I don't know." And he believed her. The next morning she was summoned, not to the ops room, not to debrief. To a quiet hangar at the far end of the base. Inside waited a small transport plane, engines idling, the kind of aircraft that carried men and women to places that didn't exist on any map. Two men in suits stood by the ramp, not soldiers, not operatives, something else. "Asset Becker," one said flatly. "Orders for immediate redeployment, classified destination." Her eyes narrowed. Redeployment. Morrison stood nearby, silent, watching. The man in the suit held out a document. Authority Whiskey 73, Delta 49, termination of prior assignment, transfer effective immediately. Her gaze flicked to Morrison, searching. He didn't move, didn't speak. She stepped toward the ramp, but halfway up she stopped, turned, and for the first time in weeks, her voice carried not protocol, not conditioning, but something unshielded. Am I being redeployed or erased? The man in the suit didn't answer. He didn't need to. The silence was enough. Hours later, Morrison sat alone in his quarters. The secure phone waited. The order still burned in his mind. Terminate. He hadn't followed it. He had handed her off instead, letting the machine swallow her whole. It was a coward's compromise, but it kept her alive. Maybe. His reflection stared back from the darkened window, a tired face, eyes that had seen too much. And for the first time in years, he asked himself a question he had buried. What if the system is wrong? Far away, the transport plane cut across a sky turning red with dawn. Inside, Becker sat strapped in, hands resting on her knees, eyes unblinking. The suits didn't speak. The soldiers didn't look at her. And she didn't move. But in her chest, beneath the conditioning, beneath the codes, beneath the silence, a war raged. The faces of children, the weight of choices, the ghosts of missions past. And one question she couldn't kill, no matter how hard the program had tried. Who am I when they stop giving me orders? Months later, whispers spread through corridors that had no names. A mission in Eastern Europe, a convoy ambushed, then rescued. The reports conflicted. Some said an unknown shooter had appeared out of nowhere, neutralizing hostiles with inhuman precision. Others swore civilians had been spared, though there had been no tactical reason to risk it. And in the smoke, one man claimed he saw her. A woman, blonde, calm, rifle steady. Gone before anyone could ask her name. Morrison read those whispers in an intelligence brief. His hand lingered on the page. He knew she was alive. And he knew she was choosing. Not just following. Choosing. Years later, when men told stories in hushed voices over dim barracks lights, her name returned. Not Lehi Becker, not Corporal. They spoke of the ghost commander. A phantom operative who appeared at impossible moments, who killed with precision but spared when she didn't have to. A contradiction, a myth. Some called her a failure of the program. Others called her its greatest success. But those who had stood beside her knew the truth. She was neither. She was something the system couldn't predict. Something the codes couldn't command. A soldier who carried silence not as weakness, but as strength. A woman who chose. And in the end, that was the moral Morrison carried with him to his last day in uniform. That sometimes the strongest thing a soldier can do is not to pull the trigger. That sometimes the dignity of humanity doesn't speak, it simply acts. And that was her legacy. Not the program, not the codes, not the orders, but the quiet defiance of one woman who refused to let the machine erase her soul.